Good afternoon and welcome one and all to this session of Lost Forts Tech Challenge using collaborative tools and open source for building tech solutions. This session is now being hosted by TOI along with GitHub and IBM. This is a very relevant topic and something that was launched by Times of India last year, and this time we all deal with the technological challenges. Consider this, in the last general elections, over 290 million eligible Indian voters who could have voted ultimately did not vote as they were not physically present in their constituencies at the time the voting took place. That is a huge number. Consider this as well that in the US, in the last general elections or the presidential elections in 2016, it just had 183 million registered voters. So when you all compare that to the numbers in India, it's a huge number. It's almost like that of an entire continent having no voice in the entire democratic process. But there are, of course, the technological challenges. And to discuss that, we have Karan MV, who's a developer relations professional specialized in helping developers globally build really awesome software with the resources that they need. Karan has built and grown large scale communities across India and also through the online channels. He currently leads the developer relations for GitHub in India and is focused on growing the open source ecosystem. In his previous roles, Karun has launched many global and regional developer programs that have helped thousands of developers. As a full stack web developer and the designer, he has worked on and delivered many projects to various clients around the world. He has also been associated with the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers since 2011 and helped develop exhibits for the BM Builder Sciences Center in Hyderabad. On a lighter note, when Karan is not working, you can of course find him reading books of various genres, studying filmmaking, and honing his acting and stage anchoring skills. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Karan.
Thanks a lot, Avik, for that great introduction. It's great to be here and be associated with Times of India as well as IBM for the Lost Votes Challenge. Avik, of course, has given a good introduction and a background about the necessity for the solutions challenge. Also, with some context, there was one other session, a couple of days ago, which was a bootcamp session on the Lost Words page itself, where there was some more introduction and discussion about the challenge itself. And there were quite many questions around, how do we get started, or what do we use for the technical aspects of building the solution and other things, etc. So that's the reason why we have this webinar, where I'll be talking about how you can really leverage GitHub as a platform to start building and kind of scaling your solution as well. Uh, so let me quickly share my screen and bring up my presentation. All right, great. Um, So for those of you who are live over here, we would love to have this session interactive. So if you have any questions, please, please send it our way. And for those of you who might be watching the recording, there is also a Slack channel that's available with all the mentors and everyone that you can join to connect with other participants and also with the other mentors. So what I'm going to be talking about today in the brief session is around how do you collaborate, automate, and secure your solution or any software pretty much using GitHub. So for those of you who might be not aware or might have not used GitHub before, you might be wondering, what is GitHub? Right. So for those of you who have not already heard it or it's very new for you, GitHub is basically a development platform inspired by the way that all of you techies work. From open source to business, you can host and review code, manage projects, and build software alongside 50 million developers. I'm not sure if you have noticed that last line. That's right. 50 million developers are the people who are using GitHub to build all of the great software, and also make a lot of the open source projects that so many companies are using these days. So you can, of course, go to github.com to know more about GitHub and what all is there, etc. But for this specific session, what I'll be talking about is how GitHub can help build your solution. So there are four key components, just four of them that I'll be covering. There are, of course, multiple ways that you can leverage GitHub, but the key components that I'll be talking about today is one, uh, collaboration. How can you collaborate with other people, your team members, or pretty much anyone else in building this solution? The second part is automation. How can you make use of automation to move really fast and get your solution up and running? The third one is security, a very key and important aspect for pretty much any solution, any software that you're building, and even more important for a solution that might be used and that is intended rather to be used by a really huge audience. And the last part, of course, being the open source ecosystem itself. The open source ecosystem is really huge, where there are a lot of projects that you can use to get started with for your solution. So these are, a few of the key things that I'll be covering, and how you can use GitHub to accomplish these various aspects of building your solution itself. So one thing before I get started that I want to really share is that today millions of techies like all of us are making up an increasingly interconnected community, building software that the world relies on. So it's no more in silos, it's no more one person doing it, or it's a lot more interconnected, where people sitting in various different parts of the country or even continents are working together to build software. So in such a scenario where you're distributed, or you might have not even spoken to each other before, you might be sitting in say Bangalore, and your teammate might be sitting somewhere in the national capital region, and you might have just connected over social media, you found a good idea and you have started building it, right? So in such scenarios, what becomes important is collaboration. Collaboration becomes really, really important, because you need to work together, and especially through in these times of the pandemic, where most of you might be remote, and you might have to build the solution as well remotely. So collaboration becomes really key. When when I say about collaboration, when we're thinking, what do you really collaborate on? If you think about when you're building a solution, there are multiple things. You might collaborate on the approach to solving a problem itself. So what specific part of the lost code challenge that you want to tackle around, and how do you approach solving that? And then you collaborate on building the solution itself, uh, and then of course on improving the solution if you want to kind of continue it later on as well, or even during the time period of the challenge. And there are, of course, other reasons why you collaborate, and what you collaborate on. So let's see some of the aspects of how GitHub can help in these various phases of your collaboration itself. Because the first way that you start off with might be in thinking about the approach, and then building, and then improving, etc., and then slowly try to automate, make sure there is security, and then also make use of the open source ecosystem, etc. So an example is when you start the approach, collaborating on the approach to solving a problem. Yeah. uh, what I would suggest is you start finding some open source projects to use or build on top of, and also to research some of the existing solutions. Now, in the previous bootcamp session, there were some good projects that were suggested that are open source, by IBM, available on GitHub. You can make use of those. Or if you're looking at expanding it a little more, there is a specific page on GitHub called as topics, github.com/topics. So you can really look at what are the specific topics for which you're looking for open source projects on. So you can look for things like security projects, or you can look for, say, database, or you can even look for any of the projects that have been open sourced by governments, etc. So this would be a good way to, find any of the open source projects to use or build on top of. The other place that you can really go trying to find some resources is collections. So we know that, a lot of the projects are really great, and while it can not be just related to the specific technology or, the specific aspect for which it is built, there are some curated collections, available on github.com/collections. An example, being government apps. If you go into collections, you'll be able to see some of the open source projects, that have been released by various different governments across the world. You can look at some of that as well to see what are some of the existing solutions. So this will give you a little bit of an idea as to how you can approach to solve this, or you can even start reusing some part of it. So when you next move on, you say you have like an approach. When I say about approach, you might be thinking about, how do you go about building the specific aspect. Should it be, like an application? Should it be a website? Should it be a mobile app, or what should it be? And then you go into the details. And when you know what is your approach, you go about building the solution itself. If you're using any existing tools, building using that, or if you're doing something from scratch, then going ahead and building that. So while building the solution, um, what I would suggest is, what you would be collaborating on is in splitting up the solution into smaller tasks. Now, if you're working as a team, say of 3 people, and you have your approach finalized, you might want to look at how do you split up tackling this specific solution, among the 3 people, and then you would want to work in parallel and then integrate your work towards the end of the challenge, so that all of you are contributing equally, and also you're having good contributions through the reuse of the existing open source projects as well. So for this, there is a good project management slash a planning feature within GitHub. So if you go into any of the repository, you can find the projects feature where you can keep laying out the tasks that you have, and organize it the way that you want. The example that I'm showing is, a public roadmap of GitHub itself, for which we use projects, uh, to let all of our community know, as to what they can expect from GitHub. The other aspect which is used a lot, and which is one of the key core features of GitHub, is something called as issues. So think of issues almost as, a conversation, and a specific task, almost like an email thread, if you were to compare it. Um, so you have certain messages that you want, conversations that you have. You can open issues, close issues, people can refer to it, etc. So you can almost think of it as, if you know what is the approach and what solution you want to build, make those individual tasks into issues, so it's easier for all of you to collaborate on it, and also for others to collaborate on when you are having it as open source. The third part, again, which is a very core component to how millions of developers collaborate on GitHub and build many of these open source projects, is something called as pull requests. So basically, where you make some addition, modification to the code, documentation, etc., and you use this concept of a pull request to actually tell whoever is maintaining that whole code, saying, hey, I have a new addition or a modification, I want it to be included, so please take a review, and then include that as a part of your main code. Yeah. So pull request is one other key aspect which will help you in working in parallel and integrating your work when it comes to uh, actually having your solution as a whole. um, so these are some of the ways how you can really collaborate. Just remember, we're still talking about how do you collaborate, in building the solution. Yeah. um, and the next part, if you were thinking about how do you go improving the solution, now this could be a phase where you have built your solution and you're just seeking feedback from mentors, or you're seeking feedback from anyone else once your project has been available on GitHub, or you made it open source where people can look at it and you wish to continue it. You would ideally want to get some more feedback. So for that, improving the solution, you would definitely want to gather feedback and also make it easier for others to use. Yeah? So remember, the solution that you might be building should be usable as well, right? Uh, so it should be easier as well for making it others to use. So at this point, I just want to quickly call out that many of the things that I'm talking about are the possibilities that exist, which you can use on GitHub to build your solution. They are, by no means the only way to do things, or they are not any mandatory or required ways. Yeah. So all I'm talking about is you have these possibilities, which, if you tap into, will help you better and faster build your solution and also grow it later on. Yeah. So discussions is, one of the aspects where you can start some discussions with either your teammates, with your mentors, or with others to gather some feedback. Think of it, very similar to a lot of the ways that you might be having discussions through forums, or through email threads and things like that. And the other key aspect, the second point which I mentioned about, of making it easier for others to use, is through documentation. Yeah. So you might probably not have uh, uh, kind of like a lot of time to build in a detailed documentation, but having some documentation of how your solution works, or how someone can really take a look at it, or a demo of some sorts, etc., would be really helpful, both for the solution that you're building, and as well for any software in general. An example that I show over here is that of Bootstrap, a very famous front-end framework that's been around for a long while. So their open source project has a really good documentation for people who want to start contributing, for people who want to start using, and also just to understand what this project is about itself. Yeah. So that was a quick overview on how you can collaborate and what are the different possibilities that you have to actually start collaborating in order to make it much more easier to build your solution. Now, moving on to the next aspect, and a key aspect is what I spoke about: automation. Now, automation helps you move fast. Yeah. So that's the whole reason, why automation exists in any form. There are, of course, other reasons. For example, it helps you eliminate errors, it helps you make things very repeatable, etc. But at the end of the day, it helps you move really fast in building your solution, in building your software, or whatever it is that you're working on. Yeah. So when we're speaking about automation, one aspect which comes into mind is, what can you automate? Yeah. So when it comes to your specific solution, or even any software or open source project, there are multiple things that you can automate. Just remember, automation helps you move fast. So a good way to identify what to automate is to look at where you're spending a lot of time on, that you can automate to make things much more faster. One example is communication and project management. Yeah. So think of things like automatic tasks, replies, responses, etc. Think of software workflows. Your software or your solution workflow itself, some parts of it can be automated. And also, if you're using multiple tools, to build your solution, the interaction between these multiple tools also can be automated to make things a lot more easier. So when I speak about the communication and project management, like how I mentioned, there are things like automating task status, comments, responses, etc. And also, you can use certain pre-scripted available bots to increase productivity. And this need not be just for you and your team, but it can also be for the software that you're building and for the users of the software, or the solution that you are building as well. Yeah. So an example over here that I show about is called as Probot. And a Probot is helps you use GitHub apps to automate your workflows. So an example that you can see is things like stale. So say for example you decided that you'll have certain number of issues between say three of your team members to start collaborating, and then you suddenly forget a few of them which is out over there, right? So you can use some of the apps to either like remind you or just clean up some aspects of it. So there is a whole directory of apps itself that you can use through Probot, to automate some parts of your workflow as well. The other example is something called as Hubot. Now I know while you're looking at the image, it might seem like it's like a real robo, but it's not. It is a software robo, which was built by GitHub, and again it's open source, wherein you can use a lot of the pre-existing bot scripts to automate a lot of things. So again, Hubot also has a directory of various different scripts and apps that you can use to automate some aspects of either your solution itself or the way that you're building your solution. This is about communication and project management. So when you talk about the software aspects of automating your workflows, yeah, one of the most common use cases of automating here would be to automatically build and deploy your software solution. Yeah. So wherever you're having your solution run and be accessible to its users, at some point in time, you would have to deploy it as and when you're making changes, yeah, on whatever server or wherever it is. So that's where you can use things like GitHub Actions, which is again available uh, to build and to deploy your software, to automate that process so that you can focus more on the solution part of it rather than just kind of deploying and making it ready for a demo or so. The second aspect also is again having like automated checks every time you make a change. Think about this scenario. There are three team members that you're working with, and one of them happens to make some change which makes your solution to break and not make it usable at all. Yeah. And think about this happening repeatedly, 5 times a day, 10 times a day, and happening with multiple people. So you will get caught up a lot in just trying to identify what happened because of each change. So that's where you can set up using GitHub Actions itself things like checks, so that when someone makes change, you ensure that it's all okay to be included as a part of our solution, and it doesn't break what you and your other team member might be working on. And the third aspect, an example again. Now there are various scenarios which you can of course automate, but just an example again is around the interaction between multiple tools itself. Yeah. So you can automate the interaction between multiple tools to streamline and integrate all the tools within your solution. And also you can be more productive with more data in your hand when you are building your solution itself. So there is a whole set of like pre-built apps available on the GitHub app marketplace, which you can use in order to integrate various different tools that you might be using, and to be more productive. So again, just re-emphasizing, these are just some of the examples that you can use to automate various different things, but it's left up to you. Like how I mentioned, you automate something right from the beginning, or even when you figure out you're having some issue, it makes things faster and move faster in building your solution, and helps you get that velocity as well. So that was about collaboration. and automation. Now let's take a quick look at security as well. Yeah. So the key reason why security is important for pretty much any solution, any software, or any system that you give is security helps build trust. Yeah. So if there is no security, the users or even people who are building it might not really trust the solution to do something it's supposed to do, and also to not do something that it's not supposed to do. There are two components to it. So you might be thinking, how can you secure your software? How can you secure your solution? Yeah. So there are a few examples for this. Again, just examples. One aspect is securing your code itself, and when I say code, it need not be the actual code that you're writing. If you're using a pre-existing software, say for example, for this example, say WordPress. Yeah, if you're using WordPress where you just build your solution using it, and if you're not having writing any specific code, in this example it would mean securing your WordPress installation itself. And then also it comes about securing the data. Yeah. So there were some questions actually, even in the previous boot camp, as to how do you look at data and things like that. So securing the data both of the application and also of the users is very, very critical. So you need to think about how you might want to approach securing the data as well. And also one of the other component is securing the interactions itself. So when you're interacting with the user, you might have things like, maybe you have like a web page, where they're interacting through forms. You need to secure that. Or say you're sending an email or an SMS or some notification, etc. So interactions can be between person to your solution, or it can be from tool to tool, or it can be multiple ways as well. So you need to think about how can this be secured as well. Again, you don't have to necessarily or mandatorily include all of these as a part of your solution, but it would definitely be helpful if you think about it, because then it would also show that this is something that's very much more closer to what an actual system might look like. So when we talk about securing the code itself, yeah, there are a couple of things that you might want to secure. For example, you might want to find security issues as you're using your code. Now if you're actually coding, yeah, this would mean an example like how you see it over to the right, where there is a language called CodeQL, which can be used to look at vulnerabilities within your code. Or an example is if you're using some other open source platform or so, like your WordPress or Ghost, etc. You might want to look at if you're using any additional plugins. Do you think those are secure reasonably for you to use? Yeah. So it's an approach that you need to start thinking about, and keep security at the top of your mind. And also you might want to think about updating vulnerable dependencies. Yeah. So when I say vulnerable dependencies, yeah, you might think about, okay, you're building some solution, you're using some tool or using some other framework or a package or so. Yeah. What if there is a vulnerability in that? Then even your solution, your software will get compromised. Yeah. So you need to give a little bit of thought into how you might want to see some of that as well. And an example over there, of course, is using something like CodeQL uh, to see if there could be any vulnerabilities within your code. The other example, of course, is Dependable. And you might have noticed that there are a lot of bots, that you can use with GitHub, ProBot, Hubot, Dependable, etc. And that's because it makes it much more easier for you to concentrate on what you actually want to do rather than managing a whole lot of other things. So Dependable, gives you alerts for vulnerabilities that your solution might be dependent on. And when you look at the securing data and interactions, um, start thinking about the underlying tools, underlying software that you might be using, etc., and how you go about choosing what you really want to use to build your solution. So for this, again, I would suggest going back into the topics section on GitHub, and looking at what are the various different open source projects. So for example, in the screenshot, I show an example of the database topic. So if you just look for the database topic, you can see so many different open source projects, databases, which you can use. So think about how you might want to choose. A good example again would be to go for the security topic. So there are a lot of different security projects, and the first one that you can see itself is various different lists which are there, and there are more than 11,000 repositories which have a lot of security projects that might help you at some point in time, either before the challenge ends, or even after, if you want to grow about growing your project itself. So that was the security components. We spoke about collaboration, we spoke about automation, we spoke about security, and the last part, of course, is around open source ecosystem itself. Now, why do you want to use any of the open source projects or so, etc.? Yeah. So the main and the best reason would be that the open source ecosystem really helps you accelerate. So if there is already some parts of the components of your project that's available open source, you can take a look at the license, just get a brief overview of how you might be able to use that project and in what circumstances, and then you can incorporate some of these within your solution itself. So you don't have to do everything from scratch, because there is a huge probability that a lot of the parts of the solution that you might be thinking about in your approach would already be built and available open source. So maybe not the entire solution. If you're thinking of something like, okay, I want to have probably a really nice front end web page for my solution. Yeah, there are a lot of projects which have that. Or if you're thinking I probably might want to take a look at some of the example e-voting projects. Yeah, so there would be many over there available within GitHub that are open source that you can take a look at to get some ideas. Remember, I mentioned to you earlier as well, finding a lot of these projects will help you get some ideas of how you might want to approach and go about building your solution itself. So a very good example, or a place where you can um, go for looking at some of the open source projects would be github.com/explore. Yeah, so you can go and then actually select some of the topics that you're interested in. Yeah, and the explore page will give you daily some of the interesting projects or interesting discussions, etc., that will really help you get some of the projects that's curated just for you, based on some of the projects that you've looked at, based on the topics that you have starred, based on the repositories that you have starred, etc. So this is something that many of the techies have told me that they kind of keep going back to almost to understand what's happening in the open source ecosystem specific to their interests. So this would be another great way. And lastly, I want to leave you with one thing around open source ecosystem, is in case you're not aware, in this times of the pandemic, yeah, the Arrogatu app, that all of us have been using, the Android version of that is also open source, on GitHub. So NIC has made this open source, where you can take a look at the code behind Arogya Setu, and if you have any comments or concerns or other things, you can reach out to them. They have mentioned more in the documentation on the page as well. So this is a great example of how open source can really help further the solutions that most of us might be building or working on, either for this specific challenge, or even how do you grow this after the challenge is over. So those are some of the components that I really wanted to share with all of you today, in terms of how you can collaborate, automate, secure, and also make use of the open source ecosystem. Again, I just want to reemphasize, these are by no means any mandatory requirements, or neither are they like necessitated. These are the possibilities that exist for you to really get going fast in terms of building your solution itself, and going about improving and collaborating as well. So that's a some of the presentation that I have, and the rest of the session we can go about discussing with any questions or concerns or comments that you have.
Great. Thank you so much, Karan. Very exhausting presentation. Of course, I mean, questions have already started coming in. I have a couple of questions just to begin with, and then I can obviously pull in the audience questions. Can you just let me know, just for starters, how can the lost votes challenges be addressed by using an open source platform like GitHub?
Right. So, just for starters, right? When you're thinking about the lost words solution and challenge itself, you might be thinking about, like how I mentioned, you might have different approaches. Now, I don't want to seed any thoughts over here to all of you in terms of how you can go about approaching. But say, one of the aspects that you're thinking about is, um, how do I probably build a mobile app for an e-voting, as an example. Yeah. So if you think of that probably as one of the approaches, an example could be some of the e-voting solutions are open source and available on GitHub, so you can use that. And then also there are some open source starter packs for Android as well available on GitHub. So you can collect many of these components per se, and bring them together to build your solution. uh, and another approach, if you're thinking about, say, okay, maybe not a mobile app, but I want to drive this through something like an SMS. Yeah. You would need something to help back some of those communications, some kind of a software or a backend to help drive it. So those would there would be many of them available on GitHub that you can start leveraging to build some of it. So there are these various projects. So if you kind of like split it up, how I mentioned earlier, and look at what are those specific things required, yeah, to build your complete solution, uh, there is a high probability that most of those individual components, there are some open source variants of it that you can use.
Okay, but what could be some of the key concerns while building up this network? Like security, of course, you talked about security. I mean, is security the biggest concern? And if not, what are some of the other challenges besides security?
Right. So one thing that I would, it's not really more of a concern, but
Hmm.
something that I would suggest all of you to watch out for
Hmm.
is most of the open source projects, come with a certain license. So that license is available on the open source project itself, where they indicate, what license are they releasing this software under. An example could be, they might say, this is licensed under MIT. This is licensed under Apache license. This is licensed
Hmm.
under GNU GPL license, etc. Yeah. So there are some nuances to what that license is. You don't have to kind of like really be like an expert in law to understand that, but having some understanding of the differences and what you can or cannot do with that license is helpful.
Hmm. Hmm.
So in fact, there is an online tool called choosealicense.com,
Okay.
where you can take a look at what are some of these differences and the nuances with these licenses. So that's something that I would, probably give a pointer to watch out for. Not a concern, but something that you want to watch out for.
Okay.
But the other aspect which I would say for you to watch out for um, is the open source project that you're using um, helping you meet your needs in the duration that you need? Yeah, because you can find a lot of open source projects that are really huge, and you might be thinking that, hey, it's already available and I can use this and then quickly build my solution. But it might end up being very, very huge for you to incorporate and build. Yeah. So think about what is the scale that might be required, or what is the current requirement, or how you might want to grow it, etc. So think about some of those requirements as well.
A couple of questions from the audience. This is a relevant question from Gokul, and he asks that are there some public projects from India in GitHub that have really made a huge difference? You refer to the Arogya Setu Android version, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, he asked that are there some other public projects where in GitHub from India in GitHub where there's a notable difference?
Hmm. So there are a lot of projects that have been built in India, made in India, and also gone global. And these projects, right now, these are a lot of the uh, projects that are helping techies build software. So there are, of course, some of the whole applications itself that have been like made open source. When I say application, in the sense that it can be readily used to an extent by end users as well. But there are a lot of what we call as developer tools. So an example is, say, if it's a something like a database. Huh? And there are a lot of databases and such similar kind of like uh, projects as well, that have been built and made open source in India. But these help build other software, and are not like an entire application system by itself.
Okay. Uh, Next question is from Navina, and she asks that how can I gather feedback from the Git community on my lost votes idea?
Mhm. Got it. So one place, of course, like how I mentioned, is the Slack channel, that is available specifically for the Lost Votes challenge, where various other participants would be there, and the mentors also would be there, etc. Yeah. The second aspect, if you're looking at some specific feedback, is to ask specific people for it. So what I mean by that is, there are a lot of open source and also a lot of developers and contributors, etc., to open source projects in India. So take a look at within many of the projects that you might be interested in, who you would like to seek feedback from. And when you have this project available on GitHub, you can just kind of like tag them, or reach out to them to seek feedback, etc. So the starting point, which I would say, is there are two things. One is, see who are the specific individuals or developers that you want to seek feedback from, who you feel would be able to offer some very thoughtful advice for you. And by an example, I would say you're building like an Android mobile app itself. You might want to probably seek some feedback from some of the Android developers, and some of the contributors to Android open source projects, etc. So just
Mhm.
identify that, and then most often through some of their Twitter channels, or even their GitHub profiles, they would have mentioned what's the best way to reach out to them, etc. You can reach out to them and gather feedback. The second aspect also is around, um, just let your own network know within your channels, etc., that hey, you're building this project and you need some feedback. Like how I mentioned, you can have probably an issue, or a discussion also, where you can ask others to come and share their feedback. So these two approaches I would suggest.
Okay. One question here, Karan. You talked about certain projects that were made in India and then taken abroad over on GitHub. What are some of those? Can you just share some couple of examples?
Right. So one, a couple of the, or rather, one of the example,
Hmm.
is there are projects. One of the project that spoke about at one of our GitHub events previously was called OpenEBS, which is, a storage engine that's now a part of the global cloud native computing foundation project, and so that's one of the project, and there are also other projects like Caliber, ERP Next, which is an ERP tool, and then there are other projects like Badgesto, and then there are projects like Hasura's GraphQL engine. There are projects like Hopscotch,
Hmm.
which are which is like a API request builder, and there are projects like GraphQL engine. So there are a lot of these, both applications as well as individual tools that that help build other softwares and applications, etc. So in fact, as a part of GitHub India, we talk and help many of the other developers learn more about these projects as well through
Hmm.
many of our events and through our Twitter channel and other
Hmm.
places, etc.
Okay, okay, thank you. There's another question from Lalit Shriram. He asks that how do I revert a commit that has been made public?
Okay, I think this is probably a very very specific pointed question, Lalit. So what I would suggest is you can probably hop in on the Slack channel, and I can share a few ways of how you can go about accomplishing this. So there are multiple ways that you can do this, but I think it's a little more detailed that we can have a conversation over the Lost Words Slack channel.
Arvind asks that how can I contribute to others' projects in GitHub, and can he join someone's Lost Votes Challenge project as well?
Right. So I think two components. One, how you can contribute to some of the open source projects on GitHub. So
Hmm.
there are multiple ways how you can do this. The best way that I would suggest is look for a place where you will be able to add value or contribution. So there are a lot of projects that are looking for help. And if you're a first time contributor, there are if you go on GitHub and look for issues labeled like good first issue, or for beginners, or some of those, you'll find a lot of tasks slash issues of projects which are looking for contributors, and it's good for someone to get started with. Yeah. So that's generally, if you want to contribute to open source. Second, how you might want to look at helping some of the others build the solution for the Lost Votes challenge itself. I would suggest connecting with anyone else who is already looking out for a team or is working individually, or just someone who you feel has an interesting solution that you want to help contribute. Where can you find these people? Just look around on your social networks for Lost Votes or so. Someone might have tagged it saying, hey, I'm looking out for a team member, or someone might have mentioned at the Slack channel that it's just me, I'm looking out for a team member and thinking of building this, etc. So just start seeing and then start reaching out, because the whole open source ecosystem itself is very welcoming, and feel free to reach out and then express your interest to anyone when you want to contribute.
Great, great. There's another question now from Minakshi Karthik. She asks that she's a participant, of course, of the Lost Votes Challenge, but she says that she's new to GitHub. Any resources which can introduce her to the various terminologies used in GitHub, like fork, version control, etc.?
Got it. That's a good question. So if you go to GitHub, there is a specific section called as Learning Lab. Go for lab.github.com, and there is a learning lab, which is like a complete hands-on experience for you to learn various different things. So you can learn what is Git as a version control system using GitHub itself. You can learn GitHub using GitHub. And there are various of these kind of like hands-on ways to get an idea of how you go about just navigating some parts of this. So that would be a great way to get started. There are also some of the guides that we have published, GitHub guides and Git guides. So you can just search for that on the Google search engine, and you'll get all of these guides which give you an idea of what are the terminologies or the concepts, etc. And just as another thing, for many of you who might have a similar question, is that it's a very useful skill set to have of learning Git, because you might find yourself using it while collaborating, and building software together, either through teams or in various organizations, or even while contributing to open source.
Okay. One more question. We're running out of time, but we still have something. Praveen asked that what's in your opinion, what are the top apps that can help him quickly create a repository?
Quickly create a repository. Okay, I'm guessing your question might be more around how can you quickly create the solution for this. So again, I would love to share some, but again, I don't want to kind of be prescriptive or seed any specific direction, because the whole ethos behind the challenge is to get various different solutions that would be feasible to help tackle this problem, and not necessarily kind of give a direction to the participants of how to go about it. We want all of the participants to be creative in terms of how you can tackle this problem through a tech solution. But that said, there are some examples, projects, and resources that have been listed on the TOI Lost Votes Challenge website itself. You can take a look at that. Most of the projects over there are open source, which you can use to get started. Secondly, I would also want you to take a look at the session that happened a couple of days earlier. It's the recording is available on the Lost Votes Facebook page. So there are some examples which are given over there as well. Excuse me, I don't want to be repetitive, which is the reason why I'm not mentioning there's already the resources which are available over there for if you want to use a blockchain project, if you want to use databases, if you want to use queues, or if you want to use Android starter kits. There are a whole lot of projects that you can look at.
Okay. Abhiram asks, and I think Karan, you briefly touched upon this, addressing me a little while back. Are there any open source projects that are relevant to voting on GitHub? I think you briefly touched upon this, didn't you?
Right. So there are a few of them. I believe some of those are also have been, listed out on the, resources. I'm not sure what's the exact terminology, but it's available on the TOI Lost Sports Challenge website as well. But you can search within GitHub as well. So if you go into GitHub and look for the search, you can search for some of the e-voting solutions, and some of the other blockchain projects or so as well. So like how I mentioned, I don't want to be like prescriptive of certain projects, but you can explore to see what exactly fits the requirements. So like how I mentioned, think about the approach of how you want to solve the problem, and then you can look for what are some of the projects that might help you solve or go in the direction of this approach.
Okay. One more question from there's been quite a few today actually. Muzammil Sayed, and he asks that can a crowdsourced voting solution built on open source be secure enough? I think that's a very relevant question in today's times.
Repeating it, was it around can a crowdsource solution? Can you just repeat that, please?
Yeah, can a crowdsourced voting solution built on open source be secure enough?
Okay, so that's a good question. So if you look at one of the reasons why open source projects are being used a lot, in by individuals or by organizations or even various different devices that we're using today, the reason why it's open source and people trust it is
Hmm.
because of the security aspect of it. Now you might be thinking, how can it be secure? The reason being, when it's open source, it's available for everyone to look at, inspect, make changes based on the project, or just get an understanding of how it works itself. So when I spoke about security, I mentioned that security helps build you trust, right? So similarly, security is something that to an extent you can trust and be confident because it's open source. Now just as an example itself, right? So if you look at Arrogatu to Android, yeah, um, since it's completely open source over there, you can take a look at how it works, and what might be the components, or do you really feel there are any issues in that or so, etc. So there are many of these projects, and if you think about much larger projects like some of the front end frameworks, or other types of projects like Node.js, React, etc., there are hundreds and thousands of developers who are looking at it, contributing to it, etc., and continuously making it secure. And the second component is GitHub as a platform as well. When I mentioned about if any of the vulnerabilities are there, etc., um, alerts are given to help fix that. So that is one of like the real key benefits of open source, because anyone can get eyes on it and help fix any issues that can be there within that.
Okay. Rahul asks that how can he leverage the GitHub community to make his work more visible?
Right. So one thing that I want to call out over here is, um, have an updated profile on GitHub. So you can create something called a profile for your GitHub account itself, using GitHub profiles. And I've seen a lot of developers and users on GitHub put in all of their works through GitHub profile. And it's easy to understand what you're working on, what are the projects that you have built previously, and also showcase it to everyone. Yeah. So most often, what many of the developers and techies on GitHub do is they mention their GitHub handle on their Twitter or their email or LinkedIn, etc. And when you go and check out their GitHub account, they have a profile which is very similar to say like your LinkedIn or Facebook or other profiles, where you can get to know about what that specific person has been building or contributing to on the project, etc. So I would highly recommend that you have that profile in order to showcase your work, because that's the first place where someone might land up with when they are looking at what is or what you are building on GitHub.
Has the government or the election commission evinced any interest to work on open source solutions for these lost votes challenge?
Uh, right. So most of the solutions that are being built over here, and I believe TOI, you can please feel free to jump in over here on the uh, the further phases of what's going to happen to some of these solutions. Is that like how I mentioned, the whole aspect over here is open source really helps you build security and also help collaborate. And I think in most of the ways, there has been a lot of interest and support towards open source by the government as well, like how I mentioned an example being Arrogatu as well. And there are many other either data or some of the individual components itself that has been made open source by the government. So there's definitely some interest and also effort specific to the lost words challenge. I think a key thing over there is the security and the trust aspect of it, which is enabled by open source.
Okay, because yeah, just one last question, Karan. We need to now wrap this up. But I think
Sure.
Monisha asked a very similar question. That I mean, she has doubts whether using open source for voting solutions just gives hackers more, sort of an opportunity to break in and to find more entry points to hack.
Right. So I just want to give two aspects over here, right? So um, one thing is, if you're looking at it specifically from this challenge itself, yeah, uh, it most probably many of you might be building a complete solution, or maybe just some part of it, etc., which is kind of like made open source for the challenge or further on, etc., right? So as and when you're kind of making things much more stronger or much more secure, and what we call as the security terminology called as hardening your software, etc. So there are multiple ways how you can do it. Yeah. So to an extent, the the security is not just about, do I know this code or not, and can I see this code or not, but there are various other mechanisms of how um, of how you can secure your software, right? So that is a key thing, I would say. There are multiple other aspects that you can prevent a lot of the antisocial elements or bad actors to not do anything unintended with some of these solutions. So there are other ways, and it's not just about having the code that's open, so you don't really have to kind of like panic, as long as you have taken other measures to make your whole solution itself together secure. So the code is just one aspect of it.
Right. We have more or less come to the end. We just passed our hard stop time. We have plenty of questions, of course. I mean, just showing the interest of our viewers. Thank you so much, viewers, actually, for asking so many questions. It was a pleasure. Karan, thank you so much for making that elaborate and exhaustive presentation, and also taking time to answer those questions in details. Hope one and all that you have enjoyed this session. And thank you once again for joining.
Thanks everyone, and great to see a lot of these questions coming on. Do keep the questions coming in and the engagement going on throughout the challenge. We are available to help you out with any questions, like how I mentioned. You can drop in on the Slack channel, or you can follow us on Twitter, GitHub India, or tweet out to us with anything that you have, and we'd be happy to help you around. And thanks, Avik, for hosting and for
My
helping run
pleasure.
through this session.
Thank you. Thank you all. With
Thanks,
this
everyone.